Startups get the party, startups get the party started. Startups get the party, startups get the party started. You want tech and tacos, tacos and tech, you know we got it, eh? Startups get the party, startups get the party started. Startups get the party, startups get the party started. Startups get the party, startups get the party started. You want tech and tacos, tacos and tech, you know we got it, eh?
And welcome back to the Tacos and Tech podcast. I'm your host, Neal Bloom, and I am so thrilled to have on one of my favorite founders in San Diego, Aleksey Matyushev, co-founder and CEO of Natilus. Hey, Aleksey, thanks for being on the pod.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Neil. Excited to be here. You're one of my favorite investors here in San Diego. Really cool.
Well, I feel like we've actually known each other, like I think about 2 years now, but yet we've spent a lot of time together while we've gotten to know the true potential of the future of aerospace here in San Diego. So I'm stoked to kind of tell the backstory here because we're very excited for what you guys are building. And why don't you give us a quick high level overview of Natilus, and then we'll kind of take it back of where it all began.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nautilus is a San Diego-based startup focusing on what we want to be is the next Boeing, actually. So we design, build, and sell large-scale airplanes to major airlines all across the world. The company has over $39 billion worth of orders, which is really exciting. And we're actually building right here in San Diego, which is even more exciting, I think, too.
It is super exciting. San Diego has a deep legacy of aerospace, by the way, right? Like Lindbergh
Yeah.
Field is a name for a reason, right? Uh, should we talk about a little bit of San Diego aerospace and the legacy you're carrying forward?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people forget about how deeply rooted, we are here in aviation. There's a lot of aviation first that actually happened here in San Diego. I think today, all we see is just the military bases, but all the research and development kind of has been consolidated and moved away. But the history here in San Diego, as far as aviation and aerospace, has really been centered around the Navy and, how we actually deploy airplanes on carriers. But what it started to morph into was the birthplace of Convair. And so Convair got folded into Boeing in the 1995 and it finally left San Diego. But it actually had a really big facility up until 1995, early 1990s over at the airport, San Diego International as we know it today. A lot of that infrastructure has disappeared, except maybe two buildings. The first one is the San Diego Low Speed Wind Tunnel, which not a lot of people know, is actually right here in next to the airport, and it's a world-class facility. Every single Boeing airplane, through the 787 has been tested there for a variety of reasons. And the second piece of it is, I believe it's the Naval Command Center. The corrugated metal or not the corrugated, but the corrugated kind of almost roof triangular building. If you see like as you roll past the highway. You know
Hmm.
what I'm talking about? But that's actually the old Convair building. And so they actually would produce airplanes over there and they would wheel them across the tarmac, which used to be tarmac at that point, directly to go fly in San Diego.
Whoa. And we're talking all the way back to World War II. Weren't the B-24s? That's where is that you're talking about the assembly line there?
Yeah, the assembly line was, yeah, I believe it's up to B-24s was here. And then we also had the first supersonic seaplane and the only one ever designed and built and tested here. It's called the Sea Dart. It's at the museum. It's essentially the airplane with the skis, which has been quite a bit of a story, but it was actually tested here in the Bay, and it's the only seaplane that ever went
Whoa.
supersonic, which is kind of neat as well.
That is cool. And then even further back, like Charles Lindbergh, there's a San Diego connection there too, right?
Yeah, so the story is the Charles Lindbergh airplane, which was the first airplane to cross the Atlantic, was actually designed and built built here in San Diego, but the city did not actually have enough money to be able to sponsor it, and so that's why I got painted the spirit of St. Louis. So even though the airplane was built here and thought about here, it was then maneuvered over to St. Louis, which kind of culminated into the historic flight. But yeah, the city was just a little bit broke at that time.
Interesting. We can talk a lot about just that at City, but we've got a replica hanging in the San Diego airport, right? The Spirit of St. Louis. So
Yeah.
that one reminds people as they're landing our historic heritage here on aviation for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish somebody would just write Spirit of San Diego on it too at one point, but that'll cause a lot of, but yeah.
Totally. Well, yeah, deep roots here, and obviously all the bigs are here, have presence here of some sort, small or little presence. Like the United Technologies and the Pratt Whitneys even have been here, um, and the like. But how about you? How did you get the aviation bug, and where did it all start?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in the Soviet Union, and then it broke apart one day and became Ukraine. I remember the price of ice cream just kept going up exponentially, and I asked my mother what the heck was going on, and she's like, "Well, that money that we have is no longer valid, and so we got to go find other money." So no ice cream for you today.
Whoa, what a learning early on.
Uh,
Jeez.
Crazy, but my grandfather was career military. He helped build a lot of the ICBMs around the Soviet Union, which of course is now really a different topic given the war and everything. But we used to have an airfield right around where I grew up, and because he was not active military, but he used to be able to walk us over. He was really high ranking in the city. And so me and my brother, we used to actually walk onto this active airfield, and there would be like MiGs and Sukhois and all sorts of helicopters, just like an active, airfield, which was really neat. Ironically enough, we didn't really, capture that didn't capture our imagination right away. We actually were more interested in the decrepit buses where we could actually crawl in and play at that point. But it did definitely left an impression that these really cool machines really existed around me, since a very early age. And then going over here into the United States and immigrating, I grew up in Iowa, so went to high school over there of all places, and wanted to be a pilot. Turned out to be I was too tall, and so the next best thing was, aerospace engineering. So at least I get a little bit of a ride in an airplane is what I was thinking. And I honestly thought my deepest passion was going to be maybe an astronaut. Somehow, maybe in the cars, there was going to be an astronaut ticket there. And I did a summer at Ball Aerospace in Boulder, Colorado, which is, believe it or not, one of the oldest aerospace companies. Not a lot of people know that. So
Whoa.
yeah, their majority of their business is in the canning. So if you drink like a bottle, like a can of Coke, you'll see Ball on it, and it's
Mhm.
actually produced over in Colorado.
I didn't know that's the same company. I've heard both names, Ball Beverages and Ball Aerospace. Wow, I didn't know that.
Ball Aerospace, yeah. And so they, for some reason, even before NASA existed, the founders got really excited about aerospace and rocketry, and they started Ball Aerospace. Long story short, it feels like the can business supports the aerospace business, not the other way around. But I did an internship there, worked in the clean room, saw Worldview 2, which was like the top of the line, I would say telescopic satellites. I did a lot of Google Maps. I saw James Webb Space Telescope. So when I actually was going through thermal vacuum testing in this two-story canister, it was really neat. But I really figured out that things were just moving way too slow. And so I think I was really disappointed, and I thought I got more excited about aviation at that point. And so I went back to college and switched my major, because in our school we actually could switch majors into aerospace and aeronautics and astronautics. And so I became aeronautics shortly afterwards.
Ah,
But yeah, fast forward to that, got really lucky, worked at Piper Aircraft, became an aerodynamicist, which is very few of us. So it's kind of like we call ourselves rarer than heart surgeons. You don't really need a lot of us in the United States. I think that's part of it. But I did a lot of airplane programs over there, and then moved over to the West Coast to work on cutting edge unmanned technologies for Kratos. And so a lot of my work is now declassified or is flying, which is really exciting.
that is exciting. But I want to peel back a little bit because your
Yeah.
entire career has been in aerospace. Uh, you went to school that was exclusively aerospace, right? Aeronautics and aerospace.
Really weird school. It's called Embry-Riddle University. There's two campuses, one out of Daytona Beach and one out of Prescott, Arizona. And I didn't want to be in the desert, so we went to Embry-Riddle in Daytona. And that's actually where I met my co-founder, Anatoly. So we've known each
Hmm.
other a very long time. But yeah, very weird school. It lives and breathes aviation. The running joke is you only read one book that is not aviation related, and it was Seabiscuit. For some reason, there's this one teacher that always had like the Seabiscuit school book, but like we read everything from like the right stuff, all the movies that we were educated, all the history was entirely aviation based. We had like Chinook helicopters land on our base, we're on the school campus during the ROTC training. Half of my friends were pilots. We had the flight line right over there. We had business jets that were taken apart. So it was just live and breathe aviation is what it was.
And pretty much then therefore go into that as an industry, I'm guessing.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of people go into the school realizing that maybe aviation is not what they want to do because it's very, very concentrated. But the folks that do graduate, it really feels like, this is their bread and butter, and there's an incredible amount of passion for it. So I think we're always excited when we meet an Embry-Riddle grad, and so we actually don't have that many working for us, ironically enough. They usually go to like the bigger companies, but still,
Hmm,
it's fun to
interesting.
see it. Yeah.
But yeah, like I would imagine it's a tight-knit group, and it's I think you've got a story of some other classmates who have gone on to start other companies related as well too.
Yeah, it was when we were raising a pre-seed round, and Draper Associates led our pre-seed round out of San Francisco, and it was he kind of made a joke, is like I've been like the last three founders that I invested in aviation aerospace all came from Embry-Riddle, and we were all classmates, and so there was like us, Nautilus. There was a company called Mothership, which doesn't exist anymore, and then the third one is Bagaviv Aviation. They did rocketry, and so that one doesn't exist unfortunately either. But yeah, all in a span of call like 6 to 8 months, Tim Draper, pre-seed, he's just like, what is the school doing over there?
Well, it makes sense. It's hyper focused. You have the built-in talent pool and classmates who, are potential co-founders or future hires. So, kind of makes sense to have it all built out in a box. Piper, you said was in Florida. Was that kind of the natural move, or did you seek out, specifically you wanted to go build, that kind of planes?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting story. I did not want to go work at Piper. For some reason, I thought like I wanted to go to Gulfstream, which was like higher end business jets in Savannah, and they also paid better. So I think that was an attraction. But like right when we graduated, 2009, 2010, like the market collapsed, and so as everybody told us, beggars cannot be choosers. And out of everybody in aviation, everybody was essentially pinching everything as far as hiring. But Piper was actually on the rise. They had this like big business jet program that had a lot of funding under it. It was the first like business jet built out of Piper. And so like there was a lot of technology, and that the company was inventing itself and reinventing itself too. And they were taking kids by the buttload, just down the street or directly from Embry-Riddle into Piper. And if you know anything about Piper, is it's got a very long history. There's a lot of ups and there's a lot of downs. And I would say at that point, one of us was being hired for $47,000. That was like literally a brand new grad out of Embry-Riddle, $47,000. And so I remember I tried to negotiate my salary, and then they were like, look, we can hire another 10 of you tomorrow, so don't even bother. But my starting salary was pretty darn low. But what was really interesting about that whole process was they were interviewing a lot of what we call like airframe engineers and structural engineers. So a lot of like the CAD work behind it and the analysis, but very few aerodynamicists. In fact, they were not even hiring for the position. And what happened was I was interviewing for a structural position, but I brought over an aircraft design that I did for a company in Norway, which is actually a flying airplane, one of the first hybrid seaplanes ever designed in the world that I designed in college. And so I brought this report over to them, and the hiring manager was like, "What the heck is this?" And so I explained this, project that I did over in college, and I designed the wing and the tails, and that's now flying. And he's like, look, this is strange. Like our aerodynamics, we just lost one. And so we actually are looking for one. And so I'll give you a connection to what became my boss at Piper. And so it was a very weird hire. All my friends got hired into structural and airframe engineers, including my co-founder. But I was I was the only one chosen that kind of graduating class to really move into aerodynamics, which of course is very much a rarity.
Totally. Really interesting. By the way, it was right around the same time, 2008, 9 was when I was entering the workforce, and I ended up at Pratt Whitney, which I was in California, but they had a huge test facility in West Palm Beach, Florida as well. So Florida also has an interesting, density of aerospace or aviation, it seems like as well too. I was more on the space propulsion side, but they had a whole jet engine test facility there that I got to tour a few times, where you only kind of one of the few places where you get crocodiles, on the test stand.
That's
They're in
right.
Mississippi, where we also tested our rocket engines. So yeah, Florida's got its unique quirks there for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, it feels like it's more space centered, less aviation centered, although that's changed wildly over the last 10 to 15 years with Embraer and the Northrop also planning up over in Melbourne, Florida. But
That's right. Yeah, I think it's talent pool based, right? So many people from Kennedy Space Center no longer launching as frequent as they were until SpaceX came around, and people obviously still want to live in Florida, so might as well hire them up for the other projects there.
yeah.
Take me through a little bit of Piper, like, and what is the role of the aerodynamicist that, kind of applied towards developing new planes?
Yeah, so the aerodynamicists essentially are, as I mentioned in the beginning, so we're usually given requirements. Usually it's a single sentence in places like Piper is at that point on a business jet was we want to take 7 people, carry them 1,100 miles, and that was it. That was like literally a single sentence requirement. Oh, and we had to do it at a Mach 0.6 or something like that. So they gave us a speed requirement. But we took that as a team and started essentially at that point there was an idea of a design that was kind of being pushed through the company, but it was changing rapidly as our competition was changing. And it's really important to note that that business jet program was part of, what we call like the dark in the skies approach. And then something to note about that is because we're seeing the same thing today with eVTOLs, but a company appeared out of nowhere called Dayjet. And so Dayjet was essentially trying to figure out how to create the taxis of the sky, essentially carrying 4 people about 200 to 300 miles on these, call it small little routes. And they were going to be essentially the taxis of the sky. They put out an RFQ for essentially an airplane for like 10,000 airplanes. And we were just like, everybody in the industry was Piper, Cessna, Cirrus. All of us had Piper or like these business jet programs that just appeared out of nowhere, specifically designed for this one specific customer. And fast forward, I'll kind of back up a little bit. Fast forward a little bit is Deja went under because nobody could bring the airplane to market for a variety of reasons, and the unit economics didn't make sense. And so Deja folded. And so just as this market kind of came overnight, it disappeared overnight too. And so a lot of us were left with these business jet programs, but no use cases. And only I would say one was a two business jets survived through that era, and it was Cirrus Jet, and then the kind of like Cessna had a Mustang, which was kind of very similar. But fast forward to today, eVTOLs, and it sounds like exactly the same, market. And we always say in aviation, history repeats itself. And so Uber came out with this white paper, we're going to darken the skies of airplanes. And look, we're going to carry 4 people, 200 miles. And we were like, oh my gosh, we've seen this before. So I don't know. We've lived through part of that cycle. We'll see how this one, is going to come about with this new technology aspect of it. But we've heard this story before during the Piper era. But yeah,
Wait, related to that, because so much VC money is poured into eVTOLs right now. Did the same happen? Did a bunch of like startups also, or like you think billion-dollar kind of pourings into these business jets overnight too?
yeah, there was a really interesting startup at that point. It was funded by Paul Allen. It was called Eclipse Aviation,
Oh
based
yeah.
out of Albuquerque. And so it was a 4-person business airplane. And Paul's direction was, make it as cheap as possible. And the story was it has to cost less than $1 million. And so the engineers started to pour over it. And then Paul Allen also wanted to design his own avionics software, being a software guy, which was like a big mistake. So like $1 million, or sorry, the program ended up costing $1 billion, and they still could not certify the airplane. And they had like brand new avionics. They had to like build a brand new engine for the program, and they were doing like stir weld, friction welding. I mean, it was just like this was like like as high end as you would go on
Yeah.
a stupid business jet thing. And so all of our programs, like within the Pipers and the Cessnas, were closer to about like 250, $350 million. And so this company is like burning $1 billion and they can't get to market. Anyway, long story short, what we learned through that process is it's hard to get a software engineer to go build an airplane company to make the right decisions. And so it's called like one of the biggest I guess blunders in aviation over the last 30 years was this Paul Allen project that essentially just torpedoed, I would say, any new programs for a very long time because they were very public about how much money they spent.
Man, interesting. Well, let's jump over to Kratos. So you had, well, first, illustrious career at Piper, bringing new products to market. right? On a legacy company that obviously had been there, done that before many, many times. Kratos, kind of a newer company to aviation, right? Take us through a little bit of that.
Yeah, so just maybe one last note of the biggest learning lesson at Piper that we had, specifically around product market, like positioning or for a product, or especially like an airplane or a big program, was at Piper, we figured out there was this PhD paper that somebody found was that the only way to be successful in aviation was that if you couldn't start out at the very smallest airplane. So specifically, like at Piper, it would be a two-seat airplane. You had to go into like where the market was going to be larger. So you're talking something that's close to like a 19-seater or a 30-seater, and then when you really start to make money is when you go to like the Boeings and the Airbus territories, because the competition is there's very few players and the differentiation is very little. So it's really easy to differentiate a product, create a better value proposition, but you had to go raise a ton of capital or you have to just like really go for the big product. And so that's something that we embodied at Nautilus. We can talk a little bit more, but that was a very big learning lesson that we took
Mm.
away at Piper. At Kratos, everything was different. Money was no object. I was brought in is like, if you have to go tank something, you're able to go tank it because we're building unmanned aircraft. And so, at Piper, the mentality was you can't lose an airplane because obviously there's people on board. And in Kratos, it was like, how quickly can we lose products so we can iterate faster? It was an entirely a different approach.
Interesting. Well, and Kratos, the history, is it come out of SAIC? Is that the history of Kratos?
Yeah, so I was actually working for a company called Composites Engineering, CEI at the time, and then it got gobbled up by Kratos. And so we were working for the unmanned division, and then really what Kratos bought was the unmanned division, essentially, while I was working on it.
Interesting. And that was in San Diego. Is that what brought you to San Diego?
No, so actually, I was working out of Sacramento. That's where the unmanned division was.
Oh, okay.
So there is an office here, but I think they do completely separate things other than
Yeah,
that.
okay. I think it's more cybersecurity and software and communication.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So you've moved cross country a few times. End up in
Yeah.
Sacramento. What is the Kratos? What do they ultimately develop?
So at Kratos, they were essentially building something called target drones. So these expendable vehicles that were unmanned that were able to replicate certain technologies of our adversaries. And so essentially, like what the pilots are able to do is practice live ammunition. And so, these drones would come up, they get deployed. First of all, they would go shoot lasers at it and they would get targeted by points. And then finally, as part of like the last test, they were able to essentially open up a live missile and actually fire it and actually know exactly what it feels like to do so. So these were expandable aircraft and drones, but then they also were starting to test different weapon systems. So, as an example, one of the big programs was at that point, which is now public, is something called MSST, which was replicating hypersonic missiles. So there's a lot of conversation about hypersonics right now in the industry, but it was like a low sea skimming hypersonic missile meant for ships.
Hmm.
And so, long story short, is we were building this product to essentially replicate this threat, so then we can test the weapon or defensive technologies that were being put or developed together for the ships. So that's what the bulk of the airplane or the business was working on. What I got put in to do was start to really think about how do you actually supersize it and move into fifth generation threats. And so we were trying to essentially replicate fifth generation threats in a very low cost package. And that was completely just mind-boggling to the industry because we have, F-22 strike fighters that cost $250 million. Our target amount or cost per airplane was $10 million.
Hmm.
And so we had to like perform as an F-22. We had to look like an F-22. Like we had to do 80% of an F-22 for $10 million.
Wow.
So that was a very weird program. We had Skunkworks come out because, in many ways, this was something that I've never done before. And even Kratos, became Kratos has never done before. And the industry hasn't done before as a whole. And so the folks that came out were like the head of structures and manufacturing the F-22, head of aerodynamics on the F-22s, like strike fighters, the guy who invented the codes for the SR-71, Bob Losky, who did all the flight controls for the F-117, which is like this, these guys are in the textbooks that you would read.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden I show up, working at Piper, and all of a sudden it's just like these, like just completely star-studded bench of all these really senior engineers. And so Really exciting program. Learned a lot. Really started to figure out how to combine, what we learned in general aviation, which is really low cost and, manufacturing and things like that, but with carbon and how do you actually blend the two together and actually, spin out unmanned systems. And so that kind of culminated, that entire work culminated into a couple of products, but what became now known as the Valkyrie. So, and that's a really tip of the spear Kratos product that is out in the field today.
That's pretty cool to be part of that. Another product. Uh, and that's specifically Air Force or no? It's used across anywhere with the F-22s and F-35s, right? Is what they kind of use it for training against.
Yeah, so they use it for training, and now they're using it part of what they're calling the Quiet Wingman program, or it's called the CCA
Mm.
Competitive. What is there's an acronym that I'm sure you understand, but it's essentially like the fact that to multiply our forces, you have a manned F-22, but they could actually command like 10 of these unmanned, Kratos products or the Valkyries. And they can tell them what to do. They can spoof, adversaries. They can also, distract them. They can also load ammunition. And so they become kind of like a force multiplier in many ways against the very expensive fighters that the United States has today.
Wow, super interesting. Huge, leap, I would think, going from a variety of things, right? Like general aviation to now defense focus, right? Different kind of power plants, I'm guessing, that are on these kinds of things, and unmanned, like a lot of different things. But as an aerodynamicist, does that change a lot for you, or not as much in terms of like plane development?
It really does. Like for me, I got a taste of supersonics, and so not very few people get to touch that. I got to touch it firsthand. It's like supersonics and transonics, and then also stealth technologies. There's different ways that we think about airplanes and what you actually do, and then which is relevant to Nautilus. It was the first time we were looking at tailless airplanes, and so I actually, believe it or not, at Piper we always take the tail for granted, the horizontal tail, and you can fix almost an entire airplane with a bigger horizontal tail. And here we were doing tailless airplanes, which there's so much more finesse around them. And so it was definitely that, and then also with cutting edge computer codes and things like that that were brought by Skunkworks and just different ideas and how you analyze airplanes was just like blew my mind. And so
Hmm.
essentially merging certification and what we were able to do really well at general aviation, but also kind of what is the tip of the spear actually looks like for defense technologies. And so I kind of came out as being a hybrid almost, being able to do both, but I always thought that there was a better way than to go after commercial technologies using a little bit of both of those ideas.
Yeah, really interesting. Or I'm foreshadowing a little bit, but it'll probably help us jump ahead, doing passenger, then defense, and then be like, you know what? I'm gonna go for cargo as my next area because the untouched area, is that the right way to think about areas that you wanted to touch within aviation?
Yeah, I mean, actually, after that, after working at Kratos, I was completely done with aviation. Because like, so there's a funny bar story that I have. So I was literally sleeping under my desk trying to get through this whole was it I think CDR, critical design review with like Skunkworks folks and a bunch of generals, super frustrated, but we got it done. But I remember like after it was all said and done, me and the Skunkworks team like came out like for a couple of beers, and I was like, "Hey guys, like you guys are at the tip of the sphere. This is your life, you know." And so fast forward, you guys are all 55, 65 years old. You're retired. Like, what is the salary? And the guys like look at me, is like, oh, it's like $220,000 at the very peak. And we were like, what the heck, So I mean, I was like, all this work and all this passion being thrown into it, and I was just exhausted. I mean, I was like, I had to look at myself in the mirror. I'm like, man, there's got to be like something better way to make money that is not this hard. And so that kind of culminated into my first company, which was an industrial design studio.
Huh. Interesting. Designing consumer products, or what were you designing?
Yeah, consumer products. So this was a time like when I remember like the iPhone cables came out and they were like 3 feet and everybody was like, what is going on here? So we literally found the manufacturer over in Asia. We called them up. It's like, can you make them 6 feet? And they're like, sure. How many do you need? We're like, oh, like 5,000. Just give us 5,000 to start out with. And so we were one of the first companies to like extend the cables. And so we went through Kickstarter successfully as a marketing stunt and grew that to be a pretty successful business. But we did cables, we did like chargers for a while. We moved into textiles, we did glassware. And it was really cool because in airplanes, sometimes the cycles or design cycles are 10 years. And so here we could do something in 2 days. send it
Hmm.
over to Asia, have a product. And we also figured out a bunch of like growth marketing hacks as well, because we were essentially left over with a bunch of these mailing lists from Kickstarter with probably like 10,000 people. And so we would take a product, we would render it, we would create like a landing page for it, and then we would send it out with a pre-buy button for all like mailing list for 10,000 people. And if the product reaches, call it like, $40 or $50,000, we're like, okay, there's something here. Let's go order tooling and let's go buy. And so we were able to test products really, really quickly, not only from a design perspective, but also from a marketing perspective. We had like almost zero risk when we were doing this stuff. It was pretty cool. At one
Wow.
point, I remember we were making like $1,000 per hour. Like we were all just like sitting there, just like our phones just kept going off of like product being bought from us. And we were like, this is way better than engineering, way better.
Yeah, and every new iPhone or new product like it build a whole ecosystem of new stuff for it, whether it's cases and car holders and new charger cables. So it kind of was good to just like stay in that lane, stay in that, and every year you'd have a whole new set of products to release, right?
Yeah, we found out that people were moving faster than us. So like there was bigger conglomerates in China, and then Anchor came about, which completely ate everybody's lunch.
Yeah.
And so the answer that we had was like, let's get out of the electronic side of it because the cycles are too short, and we don't know like when the decisions are going to be happening, and timing it is all difficult. So we actually started to go into more like these what we call like long-term products, which have longer shelf life. So like high-end goods like glassware. Like I have a patent, believe it or not, for like a self-aerating wine glass. We were doing all sorts of other stuff as well. So it was just like this other really fun stuff that she would take it like to Williams and Sonoma that could, sit there on the shelf for, 2 or 3 years and somebody will eventually buy it.
Ah, wow, interesting. But come on, the aerospace itch is always there. Like, at what point you're like, but planes in the sky, or no? Or is it no end in sight around it?
Well, the money was good, but then I was coming to like my well, I was about to hit 30 years old, and I was going through a little bit of a 30-year-old crisis. And there was two books that came out. The first one was Zero to One by
Mm,
Peter Thiel. I'm a big reader, and then Bold by Peter Diamandis. And it was like, why do we have all these, really smart people doing all this really stupid stuff where there's all these really big markets that are ready to be disrupted? And so I kind of felt a little bit ashamed. And then we were really struggling with this problem of air freight. And so I was like, man, like we have this really like I think I have like one big company in me is what I told myself. And so we originally, like I remember I told my girlfriend, which is now my wife, I was like, look, I'm going to send this pitch deck out to Silicon Valley. I'm not going to try really hard, but if we get a bunch of meetings, like I'll have to go. And so we started sending our deck cold turkey to Silicon Valley, and all of a sudden we were getting all these crazy meetings, and all of a sudden it's just things like it became a flywheel. And so it kind of started to really look like we should really take a deep look at it. And so that was kind of like the birth of Nautilus. And Tim
mm,
Draper did our pre-seed round, and then we were off to the races after that.
wow. What's on that first deck? I want to see it first of all. And what was the original pitch idea that you originally had?
So the original pitch idea, we pivoted a little bit out of it. We figured out we wanted to do air freight, and we knew that it was like the big idea behind Nautilus was it's really volume, not weight, that drives air freight today. And so how do you create a more cubic, more volume-centric design, which is what we have in the blended wing bodies.
Which, by the way, you learned firsthand by shipping probably boxes, big Amazon boxes with a tiny little 3 or 6 foot coordinate, right? Like a big waste of
Exactly right.
space. Yeah.
So I actually saw the problem firsthand. And so I knew that there was, in fact, exact something here. And it was hard to not imagine that Amazon was going to go out of, like, they're not going to go out of business. Like, for the next 40 years, e-commerce is going to be, a driving factor. So we knew that the market was there. We just needed the product, which was the airplane. But we thought, like, why don't we be extra clever and then make it a seaplane? So the company actually started with a seaplane design. We were thinking, like, look, all these container ships, interface at the port. Aviation started at the sea, here in San Diego with the Clippers and in San Francisco Bay with Clipper Lagoon. Like, why don't we bring that back? Take it the airplanes outside of the congested airports. So we raised $750,000 from Tim. Me and my co-founders, we moved into our house, including my then girlfriend in San Jose, and we were like hell bent on building the seaplane. And long story short, in 14 months, we actually had a 30-foot seaplane that was
What?
on the water, the size of a Predator drone, with exactly the same engine. And so, like, still a feather in the team's cap. Like, we were there, we were built it. We got Coast Guard approval to go test it, and we, mind you, it was also autonomous, which was scary as heck.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, we finished, like, we did a little bit of flight testing. And at that point, we were really starting to talk to UPS and FedEx. And we were with like the senior vice president and the CEO of UPS in a meeting. And then we were pitching the seaplane idea. And like, I remember like, was like Alan Grishenhorner, one of the UPS big wigs. He looks at me, he's like, Aleksey, do you see like a port anywhere here? Like, we're in Atlanta. Do you see a port within 200 miles? I was like, nope. He's like, there's a reason for that. All of our infrastructure, the $1 billion, is not at the ocean ports. In fact, it's a very small part of our business. It's really at the airport. So you got to change that. And so that's when there was like the biggest pivot in the company's life was essentially moving into, blended wing body, dropping the gear. And that's really kind of the products that we have today.
Oh, wow. Didn't know that came from UPS's feedback, customer feedback for sure.
By the way, I got that meeting through a cold email to Alan. Cold,
Wow.
yeah.
And they're still alongside today as customers, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, take us through a little bit of life and where Natilus has gone. Obviously, it moved from seaplane but cargo focused to cargo. And did you always have a plan to have like a fleet and size up, like regional, domestic, and intercontinental, or how did that all come about?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So the thing that we kind of learned at Piper, meaning that you have to go big and then you have to go even bigger right away to be able to be
Mm.
successful in aviation. So that was really the thinking behind the products and the way we structured them. So we kind of looked at what Series A could essentially be burdened with in Silicon Valley. So what can the market bear as far as the amount of cash that we can raise? And we worked our way backwards into the products, and that became essentially the two products that you see today. I'll show a little picture of that.
Oh yeah.
So we have the Kona Regional Freighter. So that's our first product. That's a 4 metric ton payload, which sits exactly into a very nice niche of category for regional air freight for customers like UPS and FedEx. And it's also got quite a bit of Department of Defense interest and contested inter-theater logistics. And then, a little bit before that, we've also started to essentially move into the passenger space. And so what we learned is that cargo is fantastic, but it's usually almost like a leftover as far as the balance sheet on a lot of airlines. I mean, short of UPS, FedEx, and possibly Amazon, but those airlines are far and few between. And so we kind of were designing the airplane as dual use for, cargo first, but with a passenger kickback. But then major airlines started approaching us and asked us, could you actually go head to head against Boeing? And we're sick of the duopoly, and your technology can be scaled and used for this. And so that culminated into our second product, which is the Horizon. And as soon as we started to market that, the order book almost quadrupled overnight, and it's still growing. And so we found quite a bit of market traction. But I really like the idea, and I think a lot of our investors and customers do, is still the the beachhead market being centered around air freight and regional air freight at that.
What's let's break this down a little bit. Within a UPS or something like that, like cargo wise, yes, it's about fitting more, I think, into an airframe, more cargo at a time. Or take me through like what's the true value prop for this versus the current that they're already using.
So UPS's fleet is, I think they have a fleet of like 200 airplanes, maybe more right now. And they have kind of two facets to the business. I mean, the first one is regional air freight, which they have other customers flying for them. And then they have the big airplanes, which is really what they fly. An airline typically is a really low operating margin business, typically 2 to 3%. So to live and die, if you look at their balance sheet, specifically 65% of that is tied to fuel.
Wow.
And so fuel is everything for them. If you can reduce the fuel burn, that is, I mean, even by call it 3 to 5%, which is what current engine technology does. But like Nautilus is a transition where we reduce fuel burn by 30%. So it's a huge step change for them. So fuel burn is really key. And the second piece is that if we can carry more goods, so sometimes they would actually send two airplanes literally like back to back with each other to do exactly the same route.
Hmm.
And so
Because they're full. They're full
yeah,
of
because they're
cargo.
both full. And so, they have this song and dance every single night where an airplane lands every single minute over at Louisville, but it's just like they need capacity to move to San Diego. So actually two airplanes will fly back to back next to each other and they would literally land. And so if you can actually carry more capacity, which is really important for them, they don't need to send that second airplane, which is also like a really big value proposition for them. And
That's that's
so
a that's a labor value prop, but I guess it's the same amount of fuel, two planes or one plane of the same size carrying two planes worth.
Uh, yeah, it's two airplanes carrying the same full loads. So if you can reduce it from two full airplanes, which again is a fuel question for them, to like a single airplane, that is the answer.
Got it.
So the problem with these airplanes is that cargo again is very volume centric, and so they can actually carry more weight, but the cabin just gets full of volume first. And so if you can carry double the amount of revenue cargo, which is what our products tend to do, essentially you're essentially doing exactly that. Instead of two airplanes, you're sending one airplane, and then that one airplane is way more efficient than just a single one of those airplanes as well. So it's a double whammy for them.
Got it. Oh, I'm going to jump ahead to passenger just to compare here because you
Yeah.
obviously are hyper focused on cargo. You've been in passenger market before in Piper. Why or who, like, were not other airlines saying, "Hey, this is great. You can carry more than I want one for passenger," or were you hyper focused on cargo for a very specific reason?
Yeah, we didn't want to get distracted for a very long time, and so we wanted to do freight first and get that out into the market, but slowly it started to become really clear that we were just kind of plateauing during sales, and revenue was still farther away because of these cargo airlines being more stingy, if that makes sense. And so we really needed like a near-term product, and so we started to then listen on the passenger side to these major brands that were coming over to us. And so it became really easy then to do deals. And of course, that's what really grew the business. We always knew we wanted to get into it eventually, just didn't know the right
Ah,
time.
okay. But within the cargo world, almost all planes, I think I learned this from you, all cargo planes are like second life planes, right? They start as passenger generally, and then, or is that not true in the regional world of cargo?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the airline. As an
Okay.
example, UPS would typically buy all new airplanes. FedEx would do the same just because this is their bread and butter. Emirates Cargo would buy brand new airplanes. But if you look at kind of like the totem pole of these African airplanes or airlines, they would usually try to do secondhand.
Hmm.
Uh, so what that really does is just limits the market for you right away. And so for us, it was kind of important, like, well, can we then leapfrog onto the passenger, first, and then kind of, backwards our way into the freight sector. That's very true on the big airplane side. On the regional side, there was a huge frustration because they typically would buy new if they could. And if they, but now it's like these airplanes are like 60 years old. And so it's time ready for a replacement. And so now they're seeing a lot of fleet turnover and really focus on brand new airplanes and getting like literally good 20 years out of the airplanes that they want to buy.
Got it. So does that kind of tell you who's buying new is who you kind of go after for cargo? It's like, well, you obviously prioritize new airframes, not like cargo isn't a secondary priority to you and compared to passenger. I'm guessing is kind of how you focus that on sales for cargo.
Yeah, so if somebody's buying new, then we know that they have money. If somebody's buying used, then we know that they're going to nickel and dime us, and there's likely no deal to be had right now. So that's what
Even if you're offering huge savings on fuel and other things like that, it's still just not a priority.
Yeah, it's the secondary airplane market. They will take a hit on the fuel burn and the maintenance costs, but then the acquisition price is quite a bit lower, and so they're able to finance it. And they usually don't have great credit ratings, and so for them, it's just an easier way to stomach it.
Got it. Okay. Well, take us through a little. So the Kona, what's it take? You talked about the seaplane, how quickly you kind of got it out together. What's it take to get the Kona together and the out in the market?
So yeah, we're going to be at a 24-month spread. We're closing out a fundraise right now to get the first airplane to market. The key thing about the smaller airplane, what we were able to do quickly, is we didn't have to invest into tooling, and so we were using more cutting edge technologies for a one-off. Where with this airplane, it has to be very much representative of what the FAA will look at for certification, and so we have to do tooling. And the moment you make a decision on tooling, you kind of have to spend the money to be able to get it done. On top of it, just the sheer size of this airplane is huge. And so the first seaplane was 30 feet in wingspan. This is 85 feet in wingspan,
Mm.
and it's about 18 times larger in weight. So more atoms, more materials, and everything.
Amazing. Well, I know you've built a lot of it in San Diego, right? You've got not just engineering here, but you've had manufacturing here as well. Take us through kind of the assets, I guess, and what brought you to San Diego because of those.
So after COVID, well, COVID actually was a really great time for us as a company in many ways because it gave us some time to think about like what the next stage of the company looks like. So on one hand, we had these big orders that were ready to kind of be materialized and we were ready to start building product. We were trying to get into the wind tunnel, but we couldn't. And so we were kind of a little bit pushed back. But it gave us time to finish the designs, which was really important. And so it became very clear from our seaplane experience that we could not build a company in San Francisco or the Bay Area. There was really, let's say, two fundamental reasons why. The first one was it's really hard to test there. So there's three major airports around, the Bay Area, and getting clearances is just for a new company will be really hard.
Mm.
Second part of it was we felt like the eVTOL market was really spinning up and they were poaching engineers like crazy. Like it was really hard for us to attract. I mean, we could attract the talent, but it was hard to pay the salaries that people were really looking for. And so we needed a shift. And we looked at two places. Florida was one of them. Given our experience in Florida, we knew what the infrastructure was over there. We knew we could attract talent and how the company would look like. And the second kind of choice we had was between Los Angeles and then over San Diego. And the big kind of thinking we were approaching was, is it better to be a big fish in a small pond or, a small fish in a big pond? Like Los Angeles was really booming, but it was hard to get manufacturing space and clearance as well. But San Diego was right down the road, and we would be probably one of the, I would say, the only startup or very few startup aerospace employers here, which means that talent would be easier. We can probably do a better cost curve there, and also the supply base that existed here and the infrastructure that we talked about at the beginning of the call exists here as well. So actually, where we felt LA was really good at the space side of it, we felt San Diego is actually better at the aviation side of it, and so it became almost a push or pull between me and my co-founder, Florida versus San Diego, and I put my foot down and says it's easier for me to go raise capital and fly to San Francisco, so it'll be San Diego.
True. And by now you've got some real like a serious drone ecosystem in San Diego by this time, right? You've got Northrop and General Atomic, right, doing their own drone programs, and obviously Shield AI building kind of a big defense drone, and then Anduril up the road in Orange County doing also kind of aerospace kind of stuff as well. Those were kind of what you're looking at in terms of talent pool.
Yeah, exactly. We've learned since then that maybe we need to blend the talent pool a little bit, but one of the things that we figured out that the folks at these military organizations just build things like Rolex watches. And
Mm.
so, they're really great at the cutting edge technologies, what we were learning, like what I learned at Kratos, but things were expensive. And so as we're scaling and growing, we believe that there's still an opportunity to blend a little bit with general aviation folks who know that, you can't lose an airplane, that it doesn't need to cost this much and kind of really think about things in a little bit different way. And I think that's really the way that we're thinking about as we're growing the kind of like the talent side of it.
Amazing. Well, I know you've also been Um, I feel like quietly building in South County, San Diego at Browns Field, this underlooked resource. But every time I step into it and every time I bring people to it, they're like, what is this? What is happening here? What is that as an asset for you guys as well, too?
Yeah, so getting the airspace clearance in San Diego was easier. Between Montgomery, which we looked at really closely, Brown was the only other, opportunity for us. And Brown felt like the sleepy little village that nobody really knew about. And even though it's got this 8,000-foot runway, hangar space, and all sorts of assets for us. So it became home really quickly for us. And then the testing areas were easier to get. But yeah, we have a 12,000 square foot facility over there where we're building real flight hardware. We actually have simulators already put together. And we're going to be building the final version of the full scale prototype over there as well. And so we still do rely on, I would say, 3 or 4 key suppliers. But the final assembly and all of it is actually going to come together here in San Diego, which makes me very excited because I feel like it's like full circle is like bringing back that cutting edge aviation that San Diego was really, really missing for a long time. The only concern is it looks like a big military drone right next to the Tijuana border. So I think we just have to be very careful.
Hyper focus on cargo, and you've been building out, not just Kona, but also a whole story and plan for how do you build domestic and intercontinental. At what point do you then start to entertain passenger, or does passenger come to you because of the big macro, which is the 737 Max, which is just like in everyone's face in a big way?
Yeah, it's kind of both. You know, we're really hyper focused on cargo, of course, but we still have to create the path forward for the horizon. And believe it or not, this is actually a great time for us to start on it. Usually, in a lot of these airplane programs, it's usually one or two engineers, an aerodynamicist, and somebody else who are spending the time to actually get the airplane right. You don't need big teams at this point. And so we do have resources already, maturing the design, getting it ready for wind tunnel testing next year.
Okay. And so who's the first what's the first customer that comes knocking on your door? Or is it some of these ones who already knew you from the cargo conversations and they're like, this is nice. This will solve like a small part of our business, but our big business, like what's that conversation like for the first customers?
Yeah, I think the first customers were one of the three big airlines here in the United States, and then we also learned was India is the second largest market for airplanes, and so we just went there for a kind of exploratory trip just to see what that might look like, and we came out with meetings with the three major airlines over there, and most recently an order from one of them as well. So I think there is a very dire need in India, and it feels like they feel that Boeing and Airbus are ignoring them because, again, their upstart airlines typically don't have the credit ratings of like a Lufthansa or like a Delta or an American here, and so they really need that attention. And so they've been really excited to actually push and pull and move things a little bit forward faster, which has been exciting for us from a sales perspective.
Wow. So how about design? So now you're building two whole different lines, right? Cargo and passenger. Uh, what's it like to design passenger? Because now you actually get to like kind of look at experience and that kind of stuff as well too. Does that
Uh,
come into play and around that?
yeah, I think passengers are very needy creatures, is what I would say, and so making them happy is it takes a lot more effort than boxes. There's a lot of, I would say, challenges like egress, how to get people out. We care more about the windows now than ever. Like, where does the window look? How much sunlight? What about that cabin space that everybody complains about for the carry-on baggage? So it's like all these things that started to come a little bit. Can we do this better? It's more like what Elon did with the first Roadster is like, look at what exists and then how can we make it like 10 times better?
Mm.
And so we're trying to be, mindful of trying to rethink everything from the ground up. And so on one hand, it's presented interesting opportunities. And on the other hand, too, we're also realizing, why things have been doing like the way that things have been done for the last 50 years and why it exists. So it's a really good time for us to be a little more, I would say, playful on the second product where we do have the time, knowing that the first product is really coming down the pipeline. That's really going to be our big revenue stream in the near term.
Got it. And you mentioned fuel burn on cargo. Is it the same kind of big value prop for passenger airlines of what they're looking for in an alternative uh, uh, passenger plane now?
Yeah, it's definitely fuel burn. And the second piece that comes into play is actually like city pairs are different. And so like a lot of our airline customers, they like to fly from Denver to Hawaii. Can you go into like Lihue Airport, which has got a smaller runway to create that, summer rush or that winter rush that we've been craving for, but couldn't get these airplanes. And so the city pairs are very different. Range becomes more of an issue. When range becomes more of an issue, is like the comfort. Can we make it more spacious? Can you offer different amenities? And so the other thing, as one major CEO told me, is if you look at the products across call like Delta, American, and United, there's very little differentiation. And so if we can create that product, the seat is a little bit better or more elbow space while we still generate the same amount of revenue, that is the big winner for us.
And are people, I mean, comparing you to Boeing? Like, are you getting that kind of like, well, this is what our current pool is? Or are they saying, no, I need diversity and, I just need something new?
I think the way they're seeing us as a complement to Boeing, it's very hard for them to imagine right now that Boeing will disappear, and it is really hard for me. But it's just the amount of airplanes that need to be built over the next 20 years is 40,000 brand new airplanes. And so Boeing and Airbus only have capacity for 35,000. Somebody needs to build 15,000 brand new airplanes. So there is room for, I would call it a third and a fourth entrant into the market space that's, compete differently on the same Boeing products, if that makes sense.
Got it. Okay. So what's the timeline? What can we look forward to seeing in the next few years, especially locally?
Yeah, locally. So we'll be doing wind tunnel testing next year, which should be really exciting. So sharing videos of that. And then we're also flying maybe another big subscale, which is really exciting for us. We might be doing it here in San Diego or somewhere else. Just we'll see how that plays out. And then lastly, just a lot of manufacturing going in our facility. And when this thing actually sits on gear and does the taxi test, I'm really excited to get the locals, news involved and to tell how this just amazing story of something that is brand new that's being built in aviation here in San Diego.
Absolutely. Well, when everyone loves in venture capital loves to say hardware is hard, right? I think you've spent your entire career in hardware and so you know what it's really like. But I think what people also say alongside hardware is hard is that it takes a lot of capital. And so from your end, from a investor's perspective, it feels like you haven't raised as much, nearly as much as some of some of these even eVTOLs which are doing way less than what you are building in this area. Like, take us through like the capital needs that you've needed to date, and then what it is going forward, to build to.
Yeah. So the company has raised $15 million to date. I feel like we were even inefficient in capital, but as you mentioned, like venture capitalists look at what we've been able to accomplish, and it is a lot for 15. I think there is a large misconception about, especially in aviation and aerospace, about what it takes to actually get to what we call like the influx point. And people say like, well, eVTOLs, you need $1 billion, and they've now all of them have burned $1 billion and, they still haven't gotten there. But you always remind them it's the technology stack. Well, they're electric, it's a brand new power plant that they have to certify. They're a helicopter or an airplane, we don't even know. And then there's also got this whole like autonomy portion that they're trying to do and put into it as well. So it's a very different product for what we're used to. Like a Piper or a Cessna cannot do $1 billion programs. Like they will all go bankrupt. And so, like in general aviation, you have to believe that, a typical program like ours is closer to the $250 million or less mark. And so that starts to become really palatable. And on top of that, I also remind people that Elon put $100 million and flew 4 rockets. And so as I was pitching, I remember like really early on, folks were saying we were going to do like another $5 or $7 million. And we had this really major investor walk us around. And he's like, well, just the risk and return for $5 to $7 million is just like, I don't think you can build a full airplane for $5 to $7 million. We were talking about the seaplane at that point. And I was like, dude, you just invested $100 million into a juicing machine. Like what, why don't we spend that capital on something that actually will move the needle on these macro industries instead of, the silly juicing machine? And, long and behold, that juicing machine went under 8 to 10 months later.
Juicero.
Juicero. And
RIP.
but the interesting thing that the investor said, well, that wasn't my team. And I'm like, well, somebody has to own up to these amounts of dollars. So I feel like, I investors are choosing not to invest into hard things because they're really afraid of what people around them will think. And it's that group think, mentality. And so I believe that if there was, a little bit more understanding of what it takes, a little bit more belief, and a little bit more proof points, I think people will inevitably want to spend the capital, invest into these big projects because the returns are way bigger. I know the horizons are a little bit longer, but it's the competitions are so much different. And so I think the alpha is definitely there.
Well, and that's true startups and venture capital is non-consensus thinking, right? And it is systematic changes, not incremental. So, I think if you're hearing from that from certain ones, they may not be the true venture capitalists that we aspire to have funding fundamental change for humanity, which is why it's hard, right, to be out front, but also will be so much sweeter when you actually like change humanity as opposed to change a few people's countertops with juice packs or something like that.
Exactly right. I think I just read this somewhere, but they say like with hard tech, the market is always obvious, but the technology is the risk. Whereas like with a software SaaS product, the market is never obvious and the technology is never the risk.
Yeah.
And so it's just how you think about it. But yeah, if you understand the technology, I really believe that you should be investing in hard tech.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of it in San Diego. We're stoked to have you here building here and come down and see the next few milestones. Um, in San Diego, we also have an amazing taco scene, that's for sure. But with a plane, you can fly anywhere with a good tacos scene as well too. Where do you pull up for tacos for you?
You know, I still haven't found a taco shop that I like in San Diego, and I'll tell you why. Growing up a little bit in South Florida, there's this called like carne molida or like ground spicy beef taco. That's like slow roasted for 18 to 24 hours at this place in West Palm Beach, and I've never been able to find anything better like that. And so I begged and borrowed, and I have the recipe for it, so I've been making them at home. So the
Okay.
tacos in San Diego is my house right now.
Okay, I love it. Well, challenge accepted. Let's go find some good carne molida locally, or at least within a Kona range distance, so that we can fly in there. I have after doing a few tours at your guys' hangar, I've taken a few groups to Tacos El Gordo in Chula
Tacos de
Vista,
Gordo is solid.
which
Yeah.
is not too far from your guys' hangar. Their El Pastor obviously is kind of legendary, and they have an entire line of just for the El Pastor, right? Which is kind of pretty nuts.
Pretty nice.
But yeah, I love it. Let's go find some good carnes molina. It's got to be here. There's like every version of a taco here, or at least maybe in Tijuana. Maybe there's a version there that's worth
Yeah, I feel like Floridian Mexican cuisine is very different, and
very different.
I don't know. I'd love to get you like into South Florida next time you're over there, and we're gonna go like hunt around for these tacos, man.
Let's
Might
do
totally.
it. Totally into that. I've got a bunch of colleagues still in West Palm Beach too, doing hypersonics testing and a bunch of different stuff. So let's go do it and meet up with some aerospace engineers, maybe to recruit over to the team here.
Love it.
Well, Alexei, it was so great to have you on the pod. Thank you for joining. Thanks for what you're building, for sharing the story, but also being a part of the local tech community. And I know you're on to go fly some big things here. So thanks again.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for being a great investor and excited to be here in San Diego and excited to bring back aviation here, which would be really exciting, of course.
Very exciting. We have a lot of San Diegans, who joined us in our last investment on the seed round, and so we're excited to have the community in on your long-term potential here as well too, and doing another round here from Rising Tide Partners that we're excited to bring alongside with you too. So thanks again, and excited to have all of the local resources available to you as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Neal.
Thank you. Cheers.
Startups get the party, startups get the party started. You want tech and tacos, tacos and tech. You know we got tacos and tech is on smash. For the green guacamole, keep accountants counting beans. Contador cuentan frijoles. Founders trying to raise some queso. La vida San Diego, school of rappy, rapping fire. Tortillas round jalapenos. In these modern times of craft beer and coffee, my coding yoga posse fold the body origami. We be surfing Coronado, eating tacos El Gordo. The taco stand in Puesto, lucha libre and sombrero. Gotta shout out Tecos Daniels by the ocean, watch the sunset. La Jolla Shores, entrepreneurs trying to get funded. When San Diego Startup Week is popping in the summer, Oceanside to Tijuana, SD be full of hustlers. From couch surfing to penthouses right on the beach. Tech leaders who believe stars are within reach. We interviewing founders who be shooting for the moon. Hashtag SD Techos with your host, Neal Bloom. Come on! Startups get the party, startups get the party started. Startups get the party, startups get the party started. Startups get the party, startups get the party started. You want tech and tacos, tacos and tech. You know we got it, eh? Startups get the party, startups get the party started.